I want to have uncomfortable conversations. I want the room to be divided. I want people to be screaming and mad at each other. Then I want them to understand each other. I want to see things from a different point of view. This is Unpopular Opinion. All right, upstanding citizens, Sanbonani Dumelang, welcome to another episode of Unpopular Opinion. Guys, thank you for all the love you're giving us. It's incredible. Please remember to subscribe, like, share. Please tell your family members in the WhatsApp groups so that our community can get larger. As upstanding citizens, upright men and women, people standing up for ourselves. So, you know me and the whole GBV thing, always trying to come at it from different angles. And today I thought, let's talk about religion and the impact that it has in socializing us. A lot of us come from a Christian background. So we have become what we are because of what we have learned. And I thought I'd bring in a mom who works with an organization that deals with such issues, Umama Elizabeth Hoorn Petersen. I don't know if it's the colored Peterson or the English Peterson.
That's a whole story by itself.
Right? With the dynamic history that we have in this country. Thank you so much for joining us. And obviously, we are going to want to know who you are and why you're here. Give us a bit of background on yourself and the name.
Right.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. It's a beautiful place. Lovely to be here. Thank you for the space that you're holding. I say I come from the wombs of Khoisan women. My mother, my grandmother, a Khoisan woman. That's the lineage. And then also I come from the wombs of Xhosa women, from my dad's side. And so the Hoorn is, when the Dutch came.
Yeah.
And they
I was about to say
found,
the Xhosas love English or white
surnames. They find us apparently beautiful and whatever our history, complex history is. So that's where I come from. I come from those kinds of wombs of women. And my dad, from my dad's side and his mother's side, African women who really stood their own ground always. I always say in South Africa, we were born into a space where the whole constitution of the country was written against our humanity. Every institution that we had to engage with, whether it was school, religion in many instances, all the institutions that we had to engage with as human beings in this country was written and intentionally against our humanity. And so I really give honor and acknowledgement to my mother, to my dad, because I got to live with them, and I got to witness their humanity. And I always say the work that I do around gender-based violence is because I've never seen my dad use violence or abuse. I've seen him being treated like crap. I've seen my mother being treated like crap, whether it was in the community, in the church, because apartheid was alive even in the colored Pentecostal communities where I grew up in. And so our hair was not right. I've got dreads, so we didn't have the proper texture, even within the colored community. And so within our church community, I've seen, my dad, very dark-skinned, my mother, sort of a typical sort of, that yellowish Khoisan,
Yeah.
And so, and then also, of course, they have these 9 children. So I'm one of 9 children.
Yes.
7 sisters are we and 2 brothers. And so I've witnessed how they've been treated. It's like my mother, the shame that she, was that was put onto her because she had so many children, and how they were treated. But throughout,
What do you mean about that?
You know the thing about, are you pregnant again? You know, and you are a domestic worker. I mean, she's a domestic worker. My dad worked, for Shell Garage, all this, mechanic, and that sort of thing. So the thing about having to give permission, you must get permission from people. And the interesting thing is they did not use contraceptives, but all of us are exactly 3 years apart.
Really?
So, and then when it was done, it was done. So I think for me, it's about, I've witnessed my dad's humanity.
Yeah.
I want to come back to that piece. Yeah. I've also witnessed my mother's humanity. She was a woman in her own right. They loved each other, but they were individuals. They always say, we don't stand in each other's way. If God has given you something to do, you must do that. If it involves me, it involves me, but most often it did not involve me. And you have to do. So whether my dad had to go to the Northern Cape, where he's from, to go and help people or preach the gospel or do whatever, he had to go. My mother wasn't in his shadow.
Yes. Wow.
I've never had, my mother never phoned my dad, where are you? When are you coming? Nothing like that. In her own time, when it felt good for her, she would accompany him and do things. So they started a project called Help to Care in Vrygrond, in Capricorn in the Western Cape, one of the oldest squatter camps, where they've worked for many, many decades, actually.
Wow.
So because this was the other thing, my dad always felt like you can't really preach for people when they are hungry, and that was a bit of a conflict for many years in the church's journey. So he felt you had to feed people, and not just feed them because you feel sorry for them. You feed them because you have to affirm their dignity. They are human beings. And so even the way that the feeding happens is very selective as to who are the people that feed, that dish the food. Because when you dish the food, the spirit in which you do it is absolutely crucial. So these little things, but
what do you mean?
Important.
Please speak to that a bit more.
The thing about, we all understand the trauma of being dehumanized in our, historically in this country. And so when people are hungry, when people have many children and they are struggling and they're unemployed and so forth and so on, that does not define who they are, their worth. And so we should never treat people less, and treat them as if they have less worth. Even when they come, and especially when they come, because it takes courage to come and say, I need your help, I'm hungry. And I guess for my parents, it also was very much linked to how they were treated. Because they told us they never wanted to take the parcels after church. Like the parcels, at church events. Say maybe there's a 21st or there's a something.
Yeah.
And then people wanted to give them.
Yeah.
But it's always like, because you are poor.
Charity.
It's charity. And so that they always resisted. And I think
because nobody wants to feel like I'm disadvantaged,
exactly.
like I'm...
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I come from, and so also a lot of what happened in our family setting is we've always had conversations. So also coming from church would be conversations about what was being preached and taught. And so we would interrogate that, unpack that. We don't discuss people because there's also the thing about you have so much that you have to sort out about yourself. So
why do you have time?
Exactly. Like, why do you want to gossip about other people? All of us have so much to heal and work through in ourselves. So I come from that kind of setting where the focus, if you start to talk about somebody else and it starts to lean in the direction that you are shaming another person, you would soon find your voice alone because nobody talks with you
That's such
on
a
that.
powerful family.
It's just like, you know what? We all have been harmed deeply in this country. And so we cannot participate. We cannot, consciously participate in just reinforcing
What
that
number
kind of
child
harm.
were you?
So I'm fourth eldest.
Oh, you're in the middle.
In the middle. Yeah.
Because, I mean, from what you're speaking, I can hear that there's a strong family foundation.
Right.
Strong religious foundation.
Right.
And a lot of who you are is your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm getting a lot of the divine feminine energy. Please speak to us about your granny and your mom.
Yeah, I mean, I never forget my grandmother. We had the privilege of, so we lived for the first couple of years of my life, we lived in a squatter camp, in Cape Town. And my parents worked, right? Hardworking people. And when it was time for us to go to school, my parents took us during the week. We had to stay with my grandmother in Hanover Park.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my first year of school. My older siblings, they've been there obviously for more years. But the incredible thing about my grandmother, it was a one-bedroomed house. And there was all these families, my aunt and her family. So my aunt and her family lived in the kitchen under the the table.
Yeah.
That was their bed.
Yeah.
So it was her and her husband and her two sons. And I had an uncle who was like the Lord. He was perpetually drunk. And that's another thing to be spoken about men, colored men on the Cape Flats, but also men and their relationship with alcohol.
Yes.
And what that is about.
Yes.
So, but anyway, so he had the lounge. He had a big bed there, the lounge, and then all of us were there. I mean, there must have been about 4 or 5 of us, my nieces.
Yeah.
My sisters, 3 of my sisters, and then probably 2 of my nieces, and my grandmother would have us all on her bed. So we slept with her, and she was like literally like this hen, protecting and covering the children. And then I remember there was a, I thought it was family. He slept, a boy, he slept also in the room, but he had his bed on the floor, So my grandmother, I think the image that I also have of her is this extraordinary woman of holding space. In fact, what I also recall is that she comes from Calvinia, right? So again, the Northern Cape. And we never know what her journey really was. Something happened. Something terrible must have happened to her as a young woman, because apparently she came to Cape Town when she was around the age of 18, and she has never gone back. And so that is a piece of history or story or journey that we would never know. And I remember my dad saying how he has tried over the years to just let her go back to visit, and she never wanted to go back. We have had the opportunity to meet some of her family. We went to visit, just look up family, that side of the family. And so there's just we don't know what happened. But something must have happened that made her decide she's not going back there. So anyway, for us, like I said, my mother, I've told you a little bit about my mother. In fact, my mother was also, I say she had a kind of spirituality that I refer to. I say she had a cut through the crap kind of spirituality. You know, it's like, do you trust God or do you trust people? When my dad was often treated, you know, really bad, and it impacts us. And my mother would constantly ask him, who do you serve? Do you serve God or do you serve people? Do you serve the church or do you serve God? You know, you got to get clear. The other thing I remember is when we were young, in teenage years, gospel music, because also I was part of a formation or that aspect of the church where we were not allowed to be part of the anti-apartheid struggle. And I remember
that's interesting.
Yeah. Yes. You know how the apartheid government used some of the churches where they would invite the pastor to come and say a prayer at Parliament, and so the pastor feels really, really special, and the congregation feel like, oh, our pastor is being recognized by the government. But I mean, that's been one of, you know, my experience. You know, at least thrice from the pulpit, it was said Nelson Mandela was the Antichrist. So that's the context that I come from.
Yeah.
You know, in terms of church. And so when I was on the SRC, that was taboo. You know, shouldn't be. This was in the 80s. But I want to come to the fact that how we then try to find expression as young people. So we started gospel groups. I'm part of New Birth, just a group of friends, you know, and we discovered, oh, we can sing. Now we couldn't, these friends came to my family's house where we were, right? It was December holidays. We wanted to go to the beach, but of course we couldn't go to the nearest beach. Muizenberg, it was for whites only. And so we would take the train to Cold Bay. And then we discovered, oh my God, we can sing. Oh, we can harmonize. And of course we started, you know, to form a gospel group. And so there's many, you know, in fact, quite a few people that came through New Birth became quite, you know, they quite, they made a life for themselves in terms of music and so forth and so on. But my mother, I remember when we were singing in Laksharama, because that was our space, you know, and like all the people were like really making a fuss because we were good, you know, and she would shout at us like after the concert, and people are like, you know, coming around you, and she would shout at us. She would say, "Who do you sing for? Do you sing for God or do you sing for people?"
Yeah.
So things. I mean, of course, it was embarrassing.
That's profound, eh?
It was embarrassing, but it was, you know, it was like, get clear.
Yeah.
Get clear.
You know what's so interesting about your mom? Because earlier on you were talking about that she had to deal with the shaming of having many children. I was giggling because it's that stereotype of Black women just giving birth, right?
Right.
But from the stories you're telling me, it's also a very strong family foundation.
Yes.
And it's produced individuals and spirits who are that spiritual, service-orientated people.
Yeah.
So I want to come to, because your calling is to GBV. Your relationship with the church and how the merge.
Right.
You know, because that's quite a taboo in the church and it's not really talked about. However, there are teachings like the man is the head and things like that, you know? Can we talk about that?
Yes. I mean, I remember I was little playing in the sand there in Hanover Park, my first year of school, and I knew I'm supposed to help people. So I always say my clarity of my calling came before I went to church. And I believe that all of us know what our calling to this earth is, and then we are introduced to the institutions, whether it's our families, church, school, that begin to tell us what to believe about what we know. And so the gift and the grace is that I have parents. My mom passed in 2007. My dad is still alive, but I had parents that consistently pointed us to our source. God is the one that knows you. God is the one whose attention you are supposed to seek. God is the one that you are supposed to trust. So that, I think that for me is key. That has really assisted me. And so I think I was in my teenage years when I had a very clear sense that I'm supposed to work with men who abuse their intimate partners, and I'm supposed to work with religious leaders on the faith dimension of gender-based violence. Of course, now I know all the terms and the words, but then it was just very clear that I'm supposed to, and it was also across different religions. And that was a bit odd for me because, my context is Pentecostal, and so I didn't have experience of course, in South Africa, it's a multicultural, multi-religious context, but I didn't have direct, except for the Muslim community, I didn't have access to other religions. So the clarity came when I was in my teenage years. And then, of course, there was, at the end of my matric year, I went to my parents to say, I have to study. And, that they didn't really encourage us to study, both in the church context where I grew up.
As a girl.
Just in general, but I think I also had my own issues with people that went to university, because I saw what happened. The ones that did go to university would come back and they treat our people, it's like, how on earth? Your parents,
they become
your
better.
family who struggled so that at least one of us can go and get education. Now you come and you treat our people as if you are better than them. So I had issues with studying, but it was clear in terms of my calling that I was supposed to study.
Yeah.
Well, so social work sounded like helping people, because remember, I knew as a child.
Yes.
And so that was the path I took. And I said to my parents, I have to study. And of course they said, we don't have money, but if you say God wants you to study, God is probably going to provide. And so anyway, that was how I ended up studying. The first person in my family, so very difficult, couldn't speak English. University was a nightmare. It was an absolute nightmare. I struggled. My first test, I got 30% for sociology. I'm like, oh my God, the people did say, why do you want to go and study? This is not for you. Anyway, so it was really...
So was it the language barrier or just the way things are?
Everything. The only way I could cope with university was to think of it as another high school. Because the struggle was too deep throughout, It's this thing of, how in apartheid we're not at home in our own bodies, within our own communities. And then our people are trying to, we're figuring out how to be human while all of us are bleeding all over the place, And I think, so that for me is, I guess, what was going on. But I knew I had to respond to God's call, and I understood that I had to study, because my calling was not just going to be just for the community where I'm from. It's apparently for broader than my community. And so, because that's my primary source and responsibility to respond to God's call, I would put myself through that. anyway, I couldn't remember anything when I finished. You know what? I could not remember a single thing that I studied when I finally graduated. My first job was in a shelter for abused women. So that's where I landed. And I remember what was funny is the shelter staff, part of the screening was I was one of 3 that was shortlisted. And so we each had to come and spend a day at the shelter because the residents had to check us out.
Yes.
And they had to decide.
Yes, they feel safe around you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And of course, so I was now the one that was selected. But my first day, I walked into the shelter and this woman looked me straight in my face. She says, "I didn't want you, I wanted the white one." I'm like, oh my God. Firstly, I cannot remember anything that I studied. I'm like a mess emotionally myself. Yeah, this woman tells me straight away she didn't want me. And so, that was 1993, so we were,
right at the burning point.
That's where we were, And so, and then woman after woman, as I listened to the women and the experiences of abuse, I was horrified, couldn't believe. How is it that, you meet someone from a place of love and connection, and that it becomes a place, that intimate relationship that is meant to be sacred, becomes such a place of horror and terror, to the extent that women had to flee for their lives. Children, those children I saw in the shelter, they've never experienced a black man in a positive sense. They only know a black man as violent and abusive. And so I struggled, because Jakta, suppose in terms of my dad.
Yes. So was this shelter, was it black women or multiracial?
It was, black. When I say black, it's both, black colored in terms of that was the majority. And then there was maybe 1 or 2 white women that might come later in the years. But yeah, so it was mostly black women. And so pregnant, and then pregnant and abused women that became homeless. And so my struggle was to see, firstly, this is unnatural for a man. African people know how to treat each other with respect. Nobody has to teach you anything about respect.
Yep.
We are a people of Ubuntu. We know what that is.
We're born with it.
We are born with it, right? And so I've had the grace of witnessing my dad, and I've always believed there must be many more men like him. So I think I was moved and deeply disturbed by witnessing black children who do not have a different experience of black men. Because they come there with their mothers that were kicked out, there was abuse, that landed up in the shelter. And something had to change. Something had to change. And I remember starting to speak to the staff. I started as a social worker, and then a few years later, I became the director of the shelter. And so that obviously also gave me spaciousness to be able to influence the way we do things. And that's what I want to say to all of us as African, people, wherever we find ourselves, if we are in, adults, we are in positions of authority, we must change things. It cannot be the same. An institution is not supposed to be the same when a black person, gets the opportunity to step into those roles. And we need to really bring in and excavate the aspects of our humanity that has always been shunted or muted or disregarded. That must come through our leadership. I'm talking about Ubuntu.
Yes.
That's what I'm talking about.
So I'm trying to now marry the you that grew up in a religious background
Right.
to the you that grew up and protected women with your voice and the GBV element.
Right.
Then I want to come back to remember the thoughts
Yes.
and the patriarchy that we learn in the church.
Right.
And possibly the reason women are abused is because they are not the head. So anything can happen to them. So how do you reconcile
those pieces?
Those two?
Yeah. I think in my experience of faith and religion, here's how I want to frame it. And here is how I frame it. Religion and faith and spirituality is one of the most powerful sources of life, yeah? Streams of life for all of us. For Africans, religion is the air that we breathe. We live. It cannot be separated from who we are. And so our relationship with the divine, with spirit, with God, however we express that, is absolutely central. And I think when I speak about gender-based violence in South Africa, the problem that I have is that we are consistently only speaking about patriarchy. And I believe that is an agenda that is set. Yes, patriarchy is the root, is one of the roots of gender-based violence. However, if we only speak about patriarchy, we are missing the other critical part. And so here I refer to what I call the Siamese twins of oppression. Siamese twins of oppression in our context has to be white supremacy and patriarchy as Siamese twins. We come from a history where we've been colonized, white supremacy, and and so if we do not speak about white supremacy, Western Eurocentric, we are all casualties of a Eurocentric education.
But then wouldn't people argue that Christianity in itself is a Eurocentric religion idea?
I problematize that as well. I think I'm with the school of thought that actually Christianity wasn't brought here. It was birthed here, taken from here, repackaged, and then brought to us in a certain way with a particular theology, a prominent, a dominant theology that is infused with white supremacist patriarchy, right?
Yes.
And so what that does, it sets the agenda. It tells us, because firstly, from a Eurocentric worldview, Africa and Africans are perpetual problems. And we must recognize that is what the Eurocentric view of Africa has always been. And therefore, whatever we do with Africa and Africans always has to be about saving them from themselves, or they are the paternalistic
relationship,
right? Now, when we only speak about patriarchy in our context, who are we talking about?
We're talking about the men.
We're talking about our men, right? And so what has happened? What have we seen over the years, over the decades that has happened? We are being put up constantly. I'm not romanticizing men. I have to say that. I'm not romanticizing men. There are many men that are doing horrific things to us, right? Whether I've experienced abuse or not. I don't have to even experience abuse in my intimate relationship to be treated like a sex object, in any other context, right? So I know what patriarchy does, but I want us to begin to think critically. Think critically about why is it so important in our context that we do not speak about white supremacy in the context of gender-based violence and its relationship with patriarchy.
Because that's a root cause, huh?
So what we, and even through my studies and through the work that I do, is we frame the root of gender-based violence in white supremacy and patriarchy. Now, here has to be clarified. White supremacy is a system of white dominance that makes the oppression of black people seem natural, ordained by God, and therefore it is good for black people that white people must teach them and train them, and because they're not fully human, in fact, if we really go to the root of even the origins of the notion of human rights. You're right? So I struggle with that as well. Why do we speak about human rights? We ought to be speaking about human dignity. But it's the Eurocentric white supremacist agenda, that firstly doesn't recognize the humanity, the full humanity of black people, and then tell them what their problem is and how their problem has to be solved. Patriarchy, of course, is a system of male dominance that makes the oppression of women seem natural, ordained by God. Therefore, you can't change it. So these two systems of belief work together. So I say, for example, to black activist men, whether it's, with the fees must fall, I spoke to one or two of those men, leaders, during the fees must fall, Black Lives Matter. You see, when you treat black women, when you sexualize them, when they come to be part of this movement as women leaders, and you sexualize them and treat them as less, you are in service of white supremacy. That's what it is. And to my white feminist colleagues that have been doing this work for years and years, when you treat black feminist women, when you dismiss our inputs
and speak for us,
and speak for us, you are in service of patriarchy
and white supremacy.
I've seen that. I've sat through those. Why we're struggling still with gender-based violence, domestic violence acts that are not really meeting our needs. I was sitting part of those conversations in those years when we were discussing Prevention of Family Violence Act. That was the first one. Some of us were sitting there trying to say religion is important to our people. Culture is important. Men are important in our lives. Even if there's violence, if the relationship ends, we don't have the luxury of living, away from our men.
Yeah.
We have a different reality. Those realities were not taken into consideration.
Does the church help, though, in GBV?
Okay, sorry, I know I've been sort of going that whole other way, but coming back to the church, and so hence also the role of the church.
Yes.
So here's what we say. Of course, if God has been captured in white supremacy, in the belief of white supremacy, and God has been captured in patriarchy, of course the church is central.
Yep.
And so, again, over the years, what I've seen, we've called everybody to account for the violence against women, the police, the government, activists, all of us. We've not called religious leaders to account for the violence against women. And I guess that's the sense, that's the work that I'm concerned about. But at the same time, we're not just here to shame anybody. Shaming is part of a Eurocentric, white supremacist, patriarchal. Those are the tools that they use. We are working from an Ubuntu base, a place of love. Ubuntu, we call each other to account. That's what it does. It speaks truth. It pulls you into order, right? And so the work that we do and that I seek to do with religious leaders is to say very clearly to them through SAFFI, through my organization, is we cannot ask the magistrate to clarify scriptures and teachings that is misinterpreted. If a man says, perpetrator says, but I'm the head of the home. If a woman comes and she says, but but my body, I'm one with my husband because we are married, and the Bible says that. We cannot ask social workers and magistrates and the police to clarify that. That is the sacred responsibility of religious leaders, right? You have to interrogate. Why is it, for example, that you still keep preaching the same themes of submission when you know that, of course,
It leads to
misinterpret, but you keep preaching the same theme.
Must be
Why
submission.
don't you preach other scriptures, such as, my body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. God dwells here. Anyone who destroys the temple, God will destroy him. Why don't we bring those kinds of themes out? And so in my years of work with religious leaders across different religions, we've obviously have to use different strategies, because obviously Christianity, like you said, is the majority in terms of the population. And so there's certain things in which, and so we have a lot of inroad, or not a lot, but we've done a lot of work within the Christian community. And so there's training, but there's theological discussions as well. And really keeping to going deeper into the things that you preach, the things that you pray over people. When people come for marriage counseling, how do you know? How do you discern? When is it a marital problem? When is it domestic violence? How do you intervene? Because it's different ways of intervening, right? But also
because these women in abusive relationships are in churches.
Exactly. And so also with other religions, it's the same thing. There are scriptures and teachings that are misinterpreted. And so it's the same thing. The imam must clarify. Christians must stop wanting to interrogate Islam, because we like to do that. We like to say, oh, but you know how Muslims oppress their women. You go into your own tradition. Go interrogate, critique your own tradition. So we do that. We're intentional about that. The same with culture. Stop. When we start a conversation in Africa, in South Africa, and we speak about culture, and we start the conversation by referring to harmful practices, what do you think happened to masses and masses of women for whom culture is important? We're silencing them. And so what I want us to, think about is why we have a certain language when we speak about gender-based violence in our context. Why is it important that we start these conversations by harmful practices, harmful cultural practices? I'm saying we need to shift. When you start to refer to the helpful resources within culture, the helpful resources within religion, you possibly will open up spaces. We will then begin to listen to women of deep faith, and they will be able to tell us what their resources are. We will be able to begin to interrogate scriptures and teachings and find those resources that hold perpetrators accountable. We will stop insisting just that women must speak out. Women have been speaking out forever, but we haven't changed anything, even in our faith community. So that's the thing. That's the thing. We believe that it becomes quite critical for faith communities to play a far stronger role in terms of holding perpetrators to account. Because if we cannot reclaim the humanity of perpetrators, we are doomed. And if faith communities cannot do that, then I don't know what will happen to us.
Because faith is responsible for family, right?
Exactly. And also, like I said earlier, because God has been captured in these oppressive systems of belief, it becomes the religious leaders and theologians, scholars of theology, it becomes their responsibility to not just write about these things, and I guess that's what we try to do through the work of SAFFI, my organization, is that we want to bring together theology and praxis, theory and practice.
Yes.
So there's been so much that has been written. There's the African Woman, the Circle of Concerned African Women Theologians, that has written extensively about, and critiqued religion, various traditions.
Yeah, because I always...
And so there's resources, so we need to bring it into praxis. And so that's what we try to do through the work of SAFFI.
Why do we not hear,
exactly
about SAFFI and women's voices? Because there's a mute almost in religion and the woman's voice.
Yeah. I think there's a lot that is going on. I think here again is about what gets made popular by whom, for whose agenda. My research, I found we did, my recent study was on the role of Christian beliefs in interventions with men who abuse their intimate partners, right? Looking at those programs and the influence of Christianity. And it was very interesting. And this is what we sit with in this country. Religion was used to oppress us. But then religion was also quite a liberating source, because religion also liberated us, right? But sometimes, and I think we claim to be secular, and so when we say we're a secular state, when we say programs are secular, we are in essence, I believe, denying, we're dismembering Africans by taking away their religion, their culture, and so there's lots of resources that we don't get to tap into. And I've seen this with my study, how these extraordinary program implementers, all of them Black. There was one white person that I interviewed. It just so happened, I didn't look for specific things. It was just the programs as it were. And these people are sitting with so much resources, both from the Christian tradition, Muslim tradition, African traditional religion. But because they are told they're not supposed to bring religion into their interventions, what do they do when the men bring it up? When the men say, but I'm the head.
Yes.
And these things. And so what I've seen is how these extraordinary program implementers merge and get creative in terms of bringing in and using faith and culture, the resources there to hold men accountable. Men who uses religion and culture to justify the abusive behavior. So my argument is that we have to ask ourselves in this country, why is it that a certain specific agenda is set? Why must we only speak about patriarchy? Why do we not speak about white supremacy and patriarchy as the Siamese twins of gender-based violence? Why is it that religion and culture, when we speak about that in relation to gender-based violence, we always most often start the conversation referring to religion and culture as harmful? What is that about? And then, of course, the challenge for us is we must shift things. We are the ones that need to create the new institutions.
So as we wrap up, I want to find out from you, why do Black men have such bad PR? You do have guys who are actually good guys and running their businesses, looking after their families, but the overriding image of the Black man is a violent guy who is a rapist, who is abusive, who is scary. Like if you had to be driving in the car, if you see a Black guy, you're more likely to check your security than if you see a white guy.
It's all linked, as far as I'm concerned, to a Eurocentric view of blackness, Africanness, and especially the Black man. right? And especially that is why we must only speak about patriarchy, because it amplifies this dark, demonic evil that just wants to rape, that just wants to kill, that just wants to do all these horrific things to black women. If black women and black men come together, I don't know what sort of a revolution we will see. Seriously. You know, if we break this myth, if we begin to say, hold on, this is actually part of an old agenda.
Propaganda.
To break black families. We are sitting now, what is this, August month? You know, 1956, what did the women do? They went to march because black families was being torn apart.
Yes.
And they went. That's what this was about. Black women know how to hold spaces, how to hold and respect and love and hold their men accountable. We know how to do that. We know how to love our men. We know how to set them on their way, right? We know that. But we also know how to work together and to create some extraordinary black families. So I want to say one of the things that I believe, and this is, in a sense, maybe one of the pieces that I believe we need to amplify, and I hope it can be a catalyst. Taking my dad as a catalyst, I believe that there's many more men like him, right? They don't want to be seen. No, they don't call themselves good men, real men. Why do you have to give them a wonderful label? They are living their humanity. And so what we've done through SAFFI, we set up an exhibition called, which is really African Men Affirming Dignity, Men Affirming Dignity. We started in Cape Town, colored men on the Cape Flats. I mean, if you hear colored men on the Cape Flats, you know already. You know what exactly. Exactly. And so we started, and so it's in the slave lodge, because we partnered with Ezekiel Museums. We said, no, these are not special stories. This is part of our history that is not captured. The humanity of African men. African men who affirm dignity as the air that they breathe. They don't think about it. Nobody trains them. They are people who know.
We
know that.
We've got cousins.
Exactly.
We know normal guys.
Precisely.
And many of them.
And so, lastly, what I want to say about the Men Affirming Dignity initiative is an initiative to talk back at this narrative that consistently profile black men as, evil, violent,
die swart
gevaar, right? And to get us to begin to write into history the narratives of African men who affirms dignity. And because our children grow up now with the media, the popularized notions of black men. It's either you must be an icon, Nelson Mandela, or you are corrupt, or whatever,
in prison.
Or you're in prison. So that's the narratives. And no, and again, what I want to say, that is our responsibility. We need to ask ourselves, those of us who have been in the sector of gender-based violence for so long, how is it we will die out? Some of us will die, depressed. Some of us will die of heart attacks. We will die of many things because we've been put on a treadmill. We've been told, this is what we fund you for. We fund you to only empower women. Victims must leave. It must be victim-centered. Don't get me wrong. Our work must be victim-centered. My question is, why do we consistently insist that women must leave? Where must she go to? Why is it that we're not working with the men who abuse? Some of the men that I've worked with in the perpetrator programs, you will find one man, for example, he's 70. By then, all the women that he has had relationships with, those relationships ended because of abuse. So how many shelters do you have to build for this one man, all the women, right? So what gets done is black men are generally profiled, like I say, either as the icon or they are corrupt and they don't want to get out of leadership. There's a narrative, there's a specific narrative, there's an agenda. Can we shift that? Can we begin to amplify the humanity of African men who affirm dignity? No, they are not good. They are not real men. They are human. As Africans, we know what it means to be human. And so I think we must dislocate ourselves from this Eurocentric view of ourselves and this Eurocentric agenda that we will only get funding if we do things like this, if we frame ourselves like this. If we do not frame ourselves as problematic, then we won't get support. I've seen that.
Yep.
I've seen that over the years, but I thank God for my parents that told me, you must find out what God's purpose is. You must do the thing just as God shows it to you. And you must love people. You must respect people. God has created people they know who they are. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you. What an inspiring way to end off. There's nothing your family lineage has given you, your calling, and you're doing it. And just from this hour conversation with you, thank you so much. It's been so fulfilling. So many holes have been filled just by your words. Thank you, Mama, for all the work that you do. And thank you for spending your time with us and making time to come and be with the upstanding citizens. Guys, thank you so much. It was so beautiful. I even got goosebumps, guys. It was so divine. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Love and light from me and the crew. We'll see you again next week. Bye-bye. I want to have uncomfortable conversations. I want the room to be divided. I want people to be screaming and mad at each other. Then I want them to understand each other. I want to see things from a different point of view. This is Unpopular Opinion.